I came here to represent the people who would like to see some sanity restored to their government. And it's funny, but because I've spoken out on illegal immigration going all the way back to 2006, and by the way, I have a sister that has a PhD, I'm pretty sure from here, and she has a master's degree, and she works here. And she doesn't agree with me on almost anything. So before I went to the border to form the largest Minuteman group, I talked to my sister. You know, I love my sister. She and I just hit it off. She's way smarter than me, but you know, I have 14 brothers and sisters, and you know, you got to kind of get along with somebody. And I really valued her opinion, and I explained to her why I was going. And the reason that I was going to the border was not to stand there against people who are coming here illegally. At the time that I went down there, 3,000 people had died in the war, the drug war that has taken over Mexico. How many, does anybody here know how many have died in the last 4 years? 40,000. Well, in the past 6 years, 40,000. It's 43, exactly, in the past, just 4 years. 43,000 people have been slaughtered by the drug cartels who are not just bringing drugs to our country, not just smuggling human beings who are desperate for hope, they are trafficking 12-year-old girls on our streets, and they are making a hell of a lot of money doing that. And what I got was an education, which is in part why I came here today. I don't expect to change any of your minds, so you can relax, sit back. You don't even need to take any notes, because I'm just going to posit a couple of thoughts, and I would love to engage in some discussion. But right now, we have 2.5 million Californians out of work. That's the number they give us. And I think maybe many of us share a distrust of government. The government is almost never accurate on numbers that would force them to do their job. So I think the number of unemployed is much higher. The stated unemployment rate is somewhere around 12% in California. I think it could be as high as 16, 17% with so many people who have given up work. I'm sorry, given up looking. The number one source of revenue to the state of California is personal income tax. 53% of our state's finances, our income, comes from personal income tax. When you take that in context, and you have 2.5 million Californians who are no longer in the revenue stream, you've got a serious problem. We've got a revenue problem in the state of California, the likes of which we've never seen. We have businesses leaving at a rapid rate, in part because the gentleman at the end of the table can't leave because he's growing stuff that grows in the ground. But almost every other industry, people have either given up or left or fled. Why is that significant? Well, we just did $1.3 billion in cuts to higher education. And there's a lot more coming because our revenues are coming up light every month. So because we are not creating jobs for other reasons that aren't really at issue here, and we have so many people out of the revenue stream, that it has cost us income. Now I know a lot of people think, well, we could just raise taxes. Well, sure, but people that pay taxes have the ability to leave the state. As a matter of fact, each of these tables here has 4 legs. I don't know if you know this, but the wealthiest 1% that are often demonized in the media support 25% of the entire California state budget with their personal income tax. The top 1%, they make over $500,000 a year. You cut off one of those legs, that whole table, all your coffee, your nice orange computer there, the silver ones, they're all going to crash on the floor. That's what's at stake in California. Well, with E-Verify, which is our topic for today, well, let's analyze that. Back in 2004, Bear Stearns did a study. They were one of the only organizations that ever attempted to really try to comprehensively analyze the whole massive impact that's been discussed in great detail here from various viewpoints. But they tried to quantify the cost of the underground economy. And I hear all this talk about how if you use E-Verify, somehow that's going to drive people into the underground economy. Well, they're already in the underground economy. In 2004, the underground economy was $885 million. I'm sorry, $1 billion, and it was approaching $1 trillion. It was on its way, growing at 25% a year. I haven't read and been able to find any statistics since. Bear Stearns is no longer in existence. But it was a fascinating study, and they looked at the overall impact. And Bear Stearns is not, they don't really have a stake in the immigration argument, so I think they would be someone that we could look at and really trust and you know, analyze. But this notion that somehow by requiring any kind of enforcement or analysis of someone's ability and authorization to work is going to result in fewer qualified people working at a time when we have Depression-era levels of unemployment is nonsense. Right now, you have a lot of people who are looking for fallback jobs. Are they going to fall all the way back to Mr. Gerard's farm? Probably not. That's probably not going to happen. But the reality is that once upon a time, it was the legal immigrants who did all the farm work. The illegals were opposed by none other than Cesar Chavez. I don't know if many of you know the history, but he was abjectly against it because he said that will drive down our wages. If you have an unlimited supply of unskilled labor, then you will eventually lower the cost, or I'm sorry, the wages of those who are doing that labor. And by the way, farm labor is not unskilled. It's actually fairly highly skilled, and I don't understand why people don't want to go there and do it. I think that when you combine technology and the skill and the fact that there's a lot of people out of work, I can tell you right now, I would never be on welfare, but we have 1/3 of the welfare recipients in the state of California. So you have a lot of native-born citizens who have been sort of pushed onto a plantation where they're being taken care of by the government, and we're teaching an entire generation not to work. I mean, it's complete abject insanity, what we have done. I am actually opposed to the federal mandate, the Lamar Smith bill. I'm actually going to agree with some people on this for different reasons. I'm not in favor of big government. I'm not in favor of any violations of our Fourth Amendment or anything else. At the same time, I believe that the 10th Amendment puts this under the command of the states, and that states ought to dictate their own destiny. And I know everybody always says immigration is a federal problem, but they really only say that when they want to shove it aside and do nothing with it and never address it. We are at a tipping point in not only the United States, but in the state of California, that if we don't aggressively address these issues, you have people that are really, when I was running for office, I walked door to door. In one part of my district, we have 28% unemployment. People cannot find jobs for a lot of reasons. In large part, AB 32 wiped out entire industries in construction and mining and put a lot of the smaller operators out of business because they couldn't comply with it. And so you have people who are desperate looking for anything that they can do. There isn't a lot of farm work there. So they're willing to do any of the manual labor jobs, but because we for so long tolerated an unchecked influx into the country illegally of people who would really basically undermine the labor market because, hey, they want a better life. And I don't blame them. If I lived in a war-torn country and I heard that I could go, 100 miles north and get a job and get be able to put my kids in K through 12 education for free, be able to get free medical care if I went to the hospital. Nobody is allowed to ask me my status, and I have 15 or 20 activist groups that will fight for every right and every benefit for me, even though I am here not legally. I mean, you'd be nuts not to come here. Now we're going to give them Cal grants paid for by you, with your wages. And I know there are probably people in this room that are against that because that's completely flat out nuts, because we have created a massive new entitlement almost as powerful as the jobs magnet. And so one of the thoughts that I always thought that maybe Americans could agree on is that if we enforce our laws, that if we actually turn off the jobs magnet and say, okay, you have to be legally authorized here to work. That means you have to have some sense of compliance with our society that you've come into illegally, to where you have to prove that you're here and legally authorized to work. I don't think that's too much to ask. When I go to charge something at the store, they often ask me for my ID. I don't sit there and, you know, start a protest and try to start a war over it. I just give them my ID because that's their term. And I think that it's the very least we can do when we realize that by allowing and tolerating a growing underground economy, we are stripping away and destroying the revenue base in this state. And it's now going to affect universities, it's affecting K through 12 education, it affects public safety, it affects our veterans, it affects whether or not we can even pave our streets. We're at a point where we owe it to those citizens who are out of work to have some form of requirement. And the E-Verify is literally the only thing available. I think it could be massively improved. I don't know why it's such a simplistic thing. It ought to be as good. I mean, you can swipe a credit card and instantly know almost everything about a person. And I think that there would be ways that we could do that, and certainly there are benefits to all Californians. But you know, if the debate is going to go on and we're going to say things like, well, if you are for any enforcement, you are anti-immigrant, then we're never going to get anywhere. It's like me saying, if you don't agree with me, you're anti-American. That's just stupid. Or you're anti-democratic. You know, you're not. You're not anti-Republican. You are for the ideas that you have, but my entire extended family are immigrants. And it wasn't until people in the media started calling me racist that I looked around at Thanksgiving and noticed I was the only white guy in the room. I never noticed that before because I didn't care. I don't think we should be fixated on color. And another thing, I don't think we should be driving all of our policies, whether at the state level or the national level, to address those who have illegally come into our country as if they are the citizens that we represent. It used to be that when you looked at Republicans and Democrats, they had to go answer to Joe, the average Joe factory worker. And that's who you answered to. Now you don't. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans answer to them. And I think that 80% of the people in the state of California feel they have no representation. And it's because we can't seem to do anything right. To literally ban local governments from protecting taxpayer funds to be used to hire people who are illegally in the country. If we can't even do that, why have any laws? Why don't we just throw them all out and say, hey, I don't care if you go 110 miles an hour, I don't care if you cheat on your taxes. As a matter of fact, we won't have any laws on the taxes. You don't even have to pay your taxes. At some point, we just get to a place of anarchy to where there's no law. But I do think, and I think it's important, even though I don't agree with you on almost anything you said, I think we have to solve some aspects of this problem soon, or we're going to have some serious fracturing that goes on within our society, much more so than it is now, because you have a lot of desperate people in the streets that don't have jobs. That whole Tea Party movement, that is not going away. In California, it's growing. Believe me, I have committed to speak at every single Tea Party in the state of California, and it is growing, and people are a whole lot angrier than the rational, compassionate, intellectual, well, I won't call myself that, unifying voice that I'm presenting. There are people who are angry and ready to go to war with their politicians. There are people who are angry at people who are illegally here. I'm not one of those people. I'm not angry. I actually have a lot of empathy for people who have come here illegally, and I understand why they have. We are sitting on a border with a failed state. If you're a father, and I'm a father, I have 5 sons, and before I ran for office, my business was going under, in large part because of California's insane environmental policies that I know perhaps nobody agrees with me on, but they affected my industry to the point they put me out of business. Because everybody's going to China. When you go to China, there's no rules. You do whatever you want. You destroy the environment. You pay people 50 cents an hour, no breaks, no nothing. Treat them like slaves, no problem. We wiped out the manufacturing industry in the state of California for the mom and pop operators. And so that's where I came from running for office. And I look out there and I see people that are absolutely desperate, and it is our obligation to solve some of these problems and not just sweep them under the rug and act like it's no big deal and we owe nothing to the citizen. If you're a citizen of this country, you have a right to expect that your government will require that the laws be enforced and that the laws be respected and that we have some kind of a semblance of fairness. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to just say, well, we're not going to enforce the laws because, you know, for political reasons and what have you. So I'm going to end it there and just say I am in favor of a state-based E-Verify. I am cognizant of the needs of the ag industry, just as there were other ways to solve the problem of those who were brought here at 2 or 3 years old, rather than create an open-ended entitlement. I don't know if you guys know that, but with the DREAM Act, we didn't just solve the problem for the kids who are here. We created an open-ended entitlement for millions more to come here. If they go to our high schools for 3 years, they get to go to university. We're already impacted. So I think that's nuts. I think that's a really poor way to solve a problem. And I think that what we ought to do here is look at some kind of very ag-focused guest worker program. I know we have one. I understand that it takes 6 months to get somebody into it. I'm sure the gentleman will talk about it. I wouldn't be opposed to something along those lines for ag only with protections for the citizens, but it has to be something that respects the taxpayers and the citizens of the state of California. Thank you.